Hello.
Hi, sorry.
Is
Sorry,
this the right one? Stacey, you can hear me?
Morena. Felicity.
Is this yeah, hi. Is this the correct meeting?
Yes, it is. Morning, Christine.
Good morning,
Okay.
Morena.
Everyone's just
Morena.
leaving it right to the last.
Morena, Christine. If you don't mind, just for the start, we're going to have all attendees mics and cameras off. Thank you. Morena, Councillor Vucic.
Morning, how are you?
Good, good. Morena, Darren.
Morena, Casey.
Just giving a couple more minutes for everybody to arrive. We have Councillor Vucic, Councillor Foy, and a number of other distinguished guests with us here this morning.
Fantastic.
Morning, John.
Morning.
John, hi. Sorry, John Brown. John Brown. I've just made you a presenter so that you can run your slide. If you don't mind just keeping your microphone on mute until it is time to speak. Thank you. Dougal and Leon, if you don't mind turning your cameras and mics off until it is time to speak, that would be fantastic. Same with you, Alec. If you don't mind, we're going to ask all all attendees to keep their cameras and mics off until we begin in 5 minutes. And when it is your time to speak, we will call you up to the front, spotlight your video, and you will have the floor. Alex, sorry, did you hear that? Are you happy to do that?
Sorry, sorry, I heard you talking. I was only just connecting in there. Sorry, what was all that?
So we just like would like to ask for all attendees to keep their cameras and microphones off until it's time to speak.
Okay, yeah.
Thanks, Alex. Morena, Yvonne, and
Trevor.
Mr. Trevor. Hello, Trevor. Morning.
Good
Hey,
morning.
good morning. Hey, we're going to be starting here in about 4 minutes. I just wanted to ask all, and Garth and Sam, if you don't mind as well, turning your cameras and microphones off until it's time to speak.
Yes, will do.
Thanks so much. Great to see you this morning. Morning,
Thank you.
Keith. What a beautiful backdrop you have there. I wish I was swimming in that sea. Nah. Look, we're going to be starting here in 3 minutes. If you don't mind keeping your camera and microphone off. Unfortunately, I have the hard task of doing that for you if you're unable to do that for yourself. But just keep your microphone and camera off until it's time to speak. Priscilla, if you don't mind, if you could do the same, that would be fantastic. Peter, I'm just going to mute your mic.
All right, here we go. All right.
Fantastic, thank you. Morning, Christine. Hopefully you heard that. Morena, Amber.
We're going to sit around here. Because
Morning.
we're going to pile around here.
Hi, Christine.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Hi.
Hi there. Hey, we're going to get started here in about 3 minutes. If you don't mind, could you turn off your camera and microphone, please, until it's time to speak? If you do have a question to ask when that time comes up, we're happy for you to turn your camera and microphone off, on at that time. Thanks, Amber. Christine, if you're happy to do that, that would be fantastic. Otherwise, I can help assist with that on this side. William, if you don't mind turning your camera
Hi.
and microphone off until it's time to speak. Thanks,
Good
William.
morning. I can. Let me just, yeah, I've got.
You've done it. You've done it. Just need to mute now, Chris. Oh, you've done it.
Okay,
Very
I'm not,
good.
I just need.
Right. Very good. Fantastic. Morning, Margaret. My name's Casey.
Good morning.
Good morning. Morena, Amanda. My name's Casey. Good to see you all this morning. Hey, I just wanted to remind you all as attendees to keep your camera and microphone off until it's time to speak. There will be plenty of time for that question and answer time to happen throughout this webinar. We just want to make sure that for the start, cameras and microphones are off, please. Anybody else want to take the time to help Ross? Nah, Ross, could you? Nah, thank you so much. Look, we have 1 minute till start time, folks. Thank you so much for your patience with us. We're really excited to have you all here. This is not something that has been done before here at Council, and we're really looking forward to utilizing this tool to help with consultation going forward. We have 1 more minute until start. Good morning, Peter. My name's Casey. I just would like to request that you turn off your camera and microphone until it's time to speak, please. Thank you. Morena, Doreen, my name's Casey. If you could turn off your microphone and camera just until it's time to speak. So we have a 10 o'clock.
She goes.
Yeah, I was going to say we can go up and get it early and just put it in the back and I'll take them home.
Oh, kia ora, Cherie. Kia ora. I'm just going to turn your
easier.
microphone off if you don't mind,
Go up
Cherie.
early and
We're going to get started on the
I'll turn
webinar. Okay, time to go. I'm just going to dip in the background here. You have a wonderful webinar. Hi, John. Just going to turn you off.
Morena, Darren, are you ready to go?
Yep, goodbye. Morena koutou, inga mana inga reo, i ngā hau e whā. Ngā mahi ngui kia koutou katoa. Ngau mai, haere mai ki tēnei hui. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou. Tēnā koutou katoa. Good morning, everyone, and welcome along to this morning's webinar. For those of you who haven't met me, I'm Darren Edwards. I'm the General Manager of Strategic Planning and Policy here at Far North District Council. If I could extend a warm welcome to our councillors who are here today. We have Councillor Foy, Councillor Clendon and Councillor Vucic. And so before we start today's webinar, if I can ask that we start with a karakia, and I will open us with that karakia. Ingoa tātou. Kia hura te marina, kia whakapapa pounamu te moana, hei huarahi mā tātou I te rangi nei. Aroha atu, aroha mai. Tātou, ia tātou, katoa. So again, thank you everyone for taking this opportunity to participate this morning. This is part of our heritage engagement, which runs through to the 13th of October as part of our district plan review. We find ourselves in really unfortunate circumstances due to the recent COVID-19 restrictions that are prohibiting us from having the type of engagement that we'd really like to do. And so as a second choice, we've opted to run this webinar to give everyone an opportunity to ask questions and to shape how we protect our heritage. Today we have a really unique opportunity to discuss heritage here in the far north and to agree how we preserve that heritage. Today you'll have the opportunity to hear from some of our heritage experts who have put a lot of work into shaping what the discussion looks like to date. And remembering that this is part of a review process, and it's an opportunity for you to tell us and help us guide how we protect those heritage areas. It's really important to acknowledge that this is a first step in providing that feedback, and it's not the last chance that you'll have to make what will be a formal submission early next year as we work through the review of our district plan. And so again from me, thank you very much for participating in today in what will be an open and lively discussion, I'm sure. And now I will pass to Greg Wilson, who is the manager of our district plan team. Nau mai, hara mai.
Thank you, Darren. Good morning. And again, thank you and welcome to everybody for participating in this morning's webinar. My name is Greg Wilson and I'm the manager for the district planning team. And I'm going to just take you through some front sections of this webinar, some general content. I'm going to introduce you to the participants and also give you some high-level kind of introductions to this topic. So let's start with introductions. So we have joining us today John Brown, who's our heritage specialist from the firm Plan Heritage. From a staff perspective, you've just met Darren Edwards, the General Manager for Strategic Planning and Policy. Myself. We have Tammy Worcester, who's a Senior Policy Planner and who leads the Heritage Portfolio for the Draft District Plan Review. We also have Teresa Burkhart, who is our Policy Planner who leads the Tangata Whenua Portfolio. Can I also welcome our elected representatives? So we have Councillor David Clendon from our Bay of Islands Whangaroa ward, Councillor Felicity Floorboy from our Tihiku ward, and Councillor John Vucic from our Kaikoui Hokianga ward. And keeping things rolling along is wonderful Aisha Huruai, who is our team leader for Democracy Services. Thank you very much, Aisha. Okay, now as mentioned, I'm just going to give you a bit of an outline of how this session is structured in various chunks, so we can see how things are progressing and the opportunities to get involved. I'm going to take you through some housekeeping. I will explain some high-level descriptions of what is heritage and why we're talking about it. Teresa's going to accompany me in that space. John Brown is going to give us an overview of heritage in the far north, so what it means for our district. And Tammy is going to give us a more detailed discussion of the 9 draft heritage areas, the areas that we're looking at today. And then at the conclusion of those processes, we'll have an opportunity for questions and answers and further discussion about the time frame and next steps. So that's the way that we've structured this session, and we're looking forward to your participation.
Thanks for that, Greg. Kia ora everybody, it's Aisha Huruai here. So I'll lead you through the housekeeping now. So this is a 2-hour session. It is being recorded and we will later share it on YouTube. So those of you who have joined us today, we're thankful that you could and that you've registered, and for those of you who have provided your questions in advance. Part of my role in this session is to call you up so that you can ask your questions to those that are here. We've got others that have registered who don't wish to ask their questions live, but staff will endeavour to answer them throughout the day. There may be the odd question that we don't quite get to or we miss over, along with questions that we receive through the chat throughout the day. But we've got a few Q&A sessions throughout the slides that we'll share with you throughout the webinar for you to again answer those questions. If you want to raise, there's a little button along the top of the screen where you'll see it in the picture here, raise a little hand. So if there's a little bit of discussion taking place and you'd like to just comment on any particular session rather than asking a question through the formal chat, please feel free to raise your hand and we can try and bring you into the conversation. We are also conscious though that we've got a lot to get through today and we want you to go away gathering as much information as possible. So we will be trying to just limit the time that we spend on each item so that we can make sure that we get through everything today. And then there'll be invitations afterwards for you to engage in further conversations so that we can keep you all informed as we head on this journey together.
Thank you very much, Aisha. Okay, I'm just going to talk to a couple of high-level issues that set a bit of a framework for what we're discussing. The first is, what is heritage? And there's a bit of a wordy definition there, and it's from the Resource Management Act, but it sets the framework for what we're discussing. Actually, I'm going to read it out, so bear with me. Historic heritage means those natural and physical resources that contribute to an understanding and appreciation of New Zealand's history and cultures deriving from any of the following qualities. Okay, so it's archaeological, architectural, cultural, historic, scientific, technological, and includes historic sites, structures, places and areas, and archaeological sites and sites of significance to Maori, including Wahitapu and surroundings associated with the natural and physical resources. So that's quite an extensive definition in the Resource Management Act. Now, the Resource Management Act, which is the piece of legislation that we at Council work under, also specifies that there is a matter of national importance relating to heritage. And in achieving the purpose of the Act, basically, we need to manage, use and develop and protect those historic heritage from inappropriate subdivision, use, and development. So right now we've got this definition and we've got a role specified for us about managing this issue that is of national importance. So that's at the national level. Even at the regional level, Northland Regional Council has their regulatory instrument, the Regional Policy Statement, and that specifies specific policies for what we do in plan making in identifying historic heritage and putting that into our plans. So I hope that just sets a high level framework. We'll get further into what that means for plan making as we go. Thank you, Aisha. Okay, so now just if you consider that framework, there's a role for council and our communities in working out how we protect heritage. And that starts with the strong interventions, maybe for the things that have higher priority. That could be regulation, but it can shift to those understanding and awareness issues, and that can include incentives to get to the right outcomes, broadening awareness and education about these resources and the stories that contribute to these places. And it also can extend to how do we support our community in achieving these outcomes that are that will contribute to our regulatory role and also those enduring stories. Okay, so the question then is, what does it mean if you're in a heritage area? Okay, so I mentioned before that can include regulation. So it may mean that there is a need for a resource consent if you are not what's called a permitted activity. The district plan identifies what is permitted activities and may have thresholds related to when you need a resource consent. And those thresholds can relate to different types of activities and land use. So think about activities. So for example, earthworks undertaken on a site over a certain threshold may mean that we need to check on those earthworks to ensure that the heritage values are not being affected in an inappropriate way. If it's dealing with heritage resources, it also can mean that certain maintenance and repairs of structures and buildings may also trigger the need for resource consent for checks and balances. It can also relate to the need for resource consents for specific buildings and structures. Okay, so there's some high level kind of framing again for why we're talking about this in terms of the regulatory requirements and how it fans out into our role as a district council with our plans about how we manage that resource. I'm now going to hand over to Teresa Burkhart, our portfolio leader for Tangata Whenua, and she's going to talk to us just briefly about cultural heritage in heritage areas. Thanks very much, Teresa.
Morena koutou katoa. Thanks, Greg. Ngā mihi mahana kia koutou I tēnei ata. As Greg said in my introduction, my name's Teresa Burkhart. I whakapapa to Hapu, the Ngāti Kuri and Te Rāroa iwi, and also Ngāti Swiss, hence my surname. And as Greg said in his introduction, my responsibility in the district plan review is around the tangata whenua parts of the plan, which is essentially the whole plan. So in specific regard to our take, the kaupapa of this webinar this morning in respect to cultural heritage in the heritage areas that we're discussing, the 9 heritage areas we're discussing this morning. The key part of this is the inclusion or inclusivity of the Māori narrative in our heritage areas is what we've, one of the reasons why we broadened some of our heritage areas to include some of the natural and physical resources, the pā, the wāhi tapu and the wāhi tūpuna or tipuna, that are in close proximity to some of these heritage areas. There are some are already included in the heritage areas, but of course we know that, as you can see by my background, I'm based in Kaitaia at Te Ahu, which is kind of a living representation of our mixed European, Dalmatian, and Māori past. And sites of significance to Māori, which are identified in 1F in the Appendix 1F of the district plan, are also things that we want to include in the heritage areas, some things that are already identified. That's me. I think we're going to hand over to the next slide, which will be John.
Before we
Hilda.
just go to John, I can see there's a couple of people that have been raising hands throughout the session. Mike, did you wish to ask a question or speak at this point in the session before we move to the next speaker?
Sorry, Mum and I are both in the same building, so sorry about the feedback. Yeah, I was just really concerned. I live in Totra Heights, which is just up above the Marsden Road historic site. And I went around, I only got wind of this the other day. I've had no correspondence, and I went around all the neighbours and knocked on all the doors, and nobody bar in our area, everybody but bar one person had received no correspondence or knew nothing about this. This just seems like another tactic like I've seen from Far North Holdings in the past, while things are happening, trying to push things through, and without the proper ability of proper consultation. I don't see what the huge big rush is to sort this. Why we can't wait until lockdown finishes and have a proper town meeting. I was involved with the historic site down on Marsden Road 15, 18 years ago, and there was plenty of opportunity to protect things back then, which weren't done. I don't see what the huge rush 20 years later, 15, 20 years later is, if we just merely wait a couple of weeks or so until we can actually have a proper town meeting. And I don't believe people have been notified properly. Well, I know that because I've been around and knocked on doors, and I just feel that this is just being rammed down our throat. As for you're talking about subdivisions and what have you, and things being protected, the sites up here are all like 300 to 400 square meters square, and most of them have already been totally excavated with 80% coverage of site. So the days of trying to protect that the ship has sailed. So I don't even see why these sites should, would, or could be included. As for the resource consents on our sites, it just sounds like resource gathering to me. Basically, it seems like it's all been rushed. I'm awfully disappointed. That's my say.
Thanks for that, Mike. It's really great that you're here and that you've been able to join us, given you didn't receive any correspondence. It's a good intro to our next speaker, who's going to explain a little bit more around heritage. So if you've got some more questions later on, then we'll invite you again. If you raise your hand, we can bring you back into the conversation.
Yeah, just one other quick point is, why is so much effort going to this when likes of our sewage and water cannot be broached? We've had to move out of our house several times in the last 3 years, because of sewage backgassing from the sewage station down in Kings Road. And I haven't even managed to meet with the senior councillor yet. I've got as far as Jules and then the Far North District Council. It's taken 3 years just to try and get a meeting to sort out sewage issues. Yet this can be raced through in COVID. The whole council seems upside down to me.
Thanks for your comments. We'll try and see if we can pursue that offline and touch base with you later. Margaret also had her hand raised. Margaret, did you have a question?
Are you there?
Yes.
Yes, I did. Like my son, I am really upset about this. I feel that the whole process is undemocratic, that you haven't even, as he said, you haven't even bothered to get the majority of people informed. How can they get involved if they don't know? I feel like council is manipulating us, and I feel it's undemocratic. And you've all been saying what you want out of this. What is in it for us? What advantage?
Hopefully we'll cover off some of those as we move through the slides, and it is a really good leeway to our next speaker, John Brown. We really do appreciate you joining us today, and we'll, if again you have any questions further on down the track, feel free to raise your hand.
Thank you.
Cheryl Bainbridge, you've
I'm
raised your
wondering
hand.
why it is necessary to have an extra layer of bureaucracy on places such as Rangikapiti Pa and Rangitoto Pa when they are already protected by legislation such as the Conservation Act and the Reserves Act. Can Teresa answer that perhaps?
We'll invite Teresa to answer that later on. I'll just acknowledge you here as a community board member. It's great to have you. Thanks.
Thank you.
I'll hand it over to John now to go through a bit around heritage.
Morena, everybody. Thank you for attending this online event. I know the format is unusual and uncomfortable for many people. My name is John Brown. I've been engaged by the Far North District Council to review a particular aspect of their district plan, which is the heritage precincts or areas that we're discussing today. I'll take you through the process that I used for that review shortly. But what I would just like to ask everybody at the moment is, if I can just run this slide through. If you would be interested in just joining me in a little exercise to help relax some people a bit and to get used to the format, if you like. So I've got this a word game that's quite simple. It will only take a couple of minutes, but hopefully it will help put some context around what we're trying to achieve in a broader sense, and just help to loosen people up a bit so they can feel a bit more comfortable with this format. So this is a word game. This is the word heritage, and without rearranging any of the letters, how many other words can you make from this one word? And if you can type your answers into the chat box as you think of them, we'll see how we go. But I can give you a start with one. So tag, that's one word. And if anyone's got any other suggestions. Yeah, without rearranging the letters. That's right, Lindis. So here's another. It. Tag, age, her, Doreen, you're nailing it there. Excellent. Rage. That rearranges the letters, but it's appropriate, obviously, for some of the people. There's age. He, her, and I, and Rita. So heritage is the tag that we might give it, the thing of age that he, her, or I care about, think about, and want to protect, and that's the purpose of the plan. I apologise if you think it's treating you like children. That's not the intent. Triage is a good one. So we'll move on from there.
So this is insulting.
The reasons why
off work for this.
Thanks, Sean. If you can carry on with your presentation, please.
Yep, I'm not intending to insult people. That is simply a way of trying to...
We've all taken time of our busy lives and businesses to be here.
I appreciate your concern. I'm also taking time to be here as well, and I'm here to answer questions that you might have about the process that was undertaken. Now, the main reason for doing this work is because the Resource Management Act requires reviews of district plans. There are other factors such as the regional growth strategies, government directions on urban development, and so on. And the commission that I was asked to look at was the precincts that existed currently and heritage areas that existed currently, and whether they reflected broadly what the Act was intending to look after, and whether they also covered the areas that that seemed to be appropriate on the basis of the information available during this research. So the process I went through was to look at the historical development of these areas, to understand that there were some relationships that were associating with the pre-European arrivals and those developments, and with the people in these areas, and that many of these places have come to be because of those relationships. And so during that process, I looked at the information that was available on a district plan, the information that was available on other data sets, such as the archaeological archaeological database, and also historical maps, plans, aerials, and so on. And in doing that work, a recommended area of interest was defined for each of the 9 areas. And that's the process that has come through so far. That led to production of the draft reports that you have seen published on the website. And I'm not sure if you can hear me all right, but that's the first stage of the consultation process. It's a position that the council wanted to go out to consultation on, so that there was an opportunity for people to feedback on something that had been looked at in the first instance. And that is why the areas have been drawn the way they have. It's certainly not, if we can go back to Darren's comment at the start, it's about a process of agreement and about working that through and refining those areas through the consultation. So I appreciate that many of you feel angry. From my point of view, this is the start of the process.
Thanks, John. That's really helpful. Cheryl, I see you do have your hand up, but I just wondered whether or not, Darren, you wanted to explain a little bit more around the process from a council perspective, given that John's here as a technical advisor.
Who's going first?
Darren, are you with us? So Darren's had to leave, apologies. I just want to take this opportunity to remind everybody that we do have a rather ambitious session to get through today. The next few slides are specific to the main suggested areas. So while we do appreciate that you all have some concerns and some questions about the process that Council's trying to bring this to you with, it would be great if we could just get through each of the areas and then we can look at the process and further opportunities later down the track. As John has signalled, this is an initial step and it is part of a lengthy process that you will have further input into later. Doreen, did you want, and Cheryl, to comment?
Yes, in the first report, it states that this is largely a desktop exercise and a snapshot of the situation. Were the places in the heritage, or where the proposed heritage areas are going to be actually looked at by anybody?
Hi there. The face report was looking at overview of the district and the provisions for the different precincts in that existing plan. Then a second assessment report was undertaken looking at the spatial areas, and that included undertaking site visits to areas, from looking at them from the public realm and so on. So in that sense, this is the starting point. Certainly there'll be room, in my opinion, for reviewing that through feedback, through this consultation process, and taking on board any specific questions and dealing with those with individuals through that process.
Thank you.
Tammy, shall we hand it over to you to introduce our 9 draft heritage areas?
Thank you, Aisha. My name's Tammy Worcester. As explained by Greg Wilson, I'm the lead on the heritage portfolio, working closely with my colleague Teresa, who oversees the tangata whenua because of the integration between those 2 portfolios. So in the draft district plan that was released in March, we suggested 9 draft heritage areas: Kohukohu, Rawani, Porirua, Te Waimate, Rangihua, Kirikiri, Paihia, Russell, Mongonui and Arangitato Peninsula. These were existing heritage precincts in the current plan. So as explained by John earlier in the presentation, when we're looking at reviewing the district plan, we go back and have a look to see if there needs to be any changes to how we're managing our heritage areas, for example, which are currently called precincts. So that's why we've looked at these 9 areas. And so when we released the draft, what we wanted to do is we wanted to show what was suggested in terms of a spatial extent as a possible location for these heritage areas. So that's the location of the 9. So if we could go to the next slide, we could start talking about each one individually, and people can ask questions obviously relative to that. So what happened was, overall, if I just look at it as the 9 areas, it's resulted in larger areas being protected potentially. Changing, as I said before, to calling them a heritage area rather than a precinct. That's due to the central government releasing national planning standards to get consistency in plans across New Zealand. So heritage areas is the term that's been decided there. We also had a look at whether we should retain some of our special zones that we have in 2 of the heritage areas, and we've gone with the approach in the draft of removing those. We've also absorbed any buffer areas that were in the existing precincts and just having a heritage area. That might be for some of you who are in the Kirikiri or Russell area. In the existing precinct, that pink line that's been shown on the map that was sent out to landowners. The intent of the draft was to simplify the rules. As has been mentioned before, it is a draft. These are not the final rules. This is not the final approach. So coming out with them is so that we show what we're thinking about, and it gives everyone an opportunity to say, do they support, do they oppose, or do they think it could be done in a better way, for example. We're also wanting to, through the new rules, also to promote appropriate development. So we do understand that, for example, if you're in a heritage building, we're not trying to freeze it in time. A lot of heritage buildings now are used for commercial activities. For example, if you look out at Russell, the Heritage New Zealand has opened a cafe in their heritage buildings. So we're wanting to enable those types of things as well. The draft has gone with a regulatory approach, as explained by Greg earlier in the presentation. So at this stage, the draft is conveying that being in an heritage area would result in the implications potentially of resource consents for doing development. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So the first heritage area that we're going to talk about is Kohukohu. Kohukohu had the least change in terms of spatial. So it was pretty much recommended to keep the existing area because it was already reflective of that historic settlement pattern. We made some very minor changes along the coastline just to reflect where the actual land was. So that's really the only difference we've made spatially there. I can see a hand has been raised.
Hi, I'm Angela Lush from Kohukohu.
Hi, Angela.
Hi. Just perhaps if you move to the next slide, Tammy.
Oh, yes, sure.
To the map.
Yep, not a problem. Yep.
I just want to raise a question that may have come up in writing as well. Just are you aware that there's a significant Wahitapu area immediately north of your outlined precinct? It's marked by green signs that our local kaumātua and iwi have put in place. And we have a historic cemetery that appears to have been excluded from this area. So the old cemetery on Rakatapu Road appears not to have been included. And I would consider that a very significant heritage place.
Okay, well, thank you for your feedback on that. Angela, have you provided any written feedback yet, or you're intending to do that?
I will do.
Okay, that would be greatly appreciated if you could provide that feedback so we can take it into consideration when we're looking at have we got the heritage areas in the right spot. We're also, as part of this process, we've reached out to Tangata Whenua to also provide feedback on whether we're capturing the right things in that space as well. And also as part of the wider district plan review, we're consulting with all the iwi authorities and other relevant hapu groups. So hopefully that information will also come through that process as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other, sorry, I'm a bit hard to tell if there's another hand up or that was the hand.
That is the hand. There was one other question.
We do have, though, we did have a question from Pauline who said that she was happy for us to speak to her question. So I'll just hand that over to Teresa. Would you like me to read the question out for you, Teresa? Okay, Pauline's question was quite similar to what Angela has raised. Is there work being done to acknowledge and protect sites of significance for local hapu in the vicinity of the proposed Kohukohu heritage area? So we probably have, I think, potentially answered that question unless you'd like to add anything, Teresa?
Oh, I guess just to say broadly, the New Zealand Heritage Pauheretanga Act 2014 gives protection to all archaeological sites pre-1900. So that's the response to the question around protection. So that's the primary act, irrespective of whether those sites are identified in the district plan or not. In respect to the question about acknowledging Wahitapu outside the Kohukohu heritage area, I guess maybe that refers to our previous speakers giving us information about Wahitapu. Normally we'd it's about knowing about these things. So maybe that's a question we can pursue with our iwi and Hapu representatives now that we've got a bit of knowledge from the community on that. So that's appreciated. Thank you.
I think because probably the that was the only question that we had posed to us and when people registered, and unless there's anyone else who has a question about kohu, we could move on to one of the other heritage areas. Okay, I think we're good. So if we could jump to the next slide, thanks. Okay, so the next area we have is Rawene. So with Rawene, there is a suggestion to enlarge the area. It is if we move to the map, you'll be able to see that it is a significant change that was suggested. If we could, yeah, to the next slide. Thank you. So you can see with that dotted line area is where the current plan manages the heritage precinct, and the purple area is the outline of an area that we have put forward as a starting point. So the reason for that is it was to follow the historical settlement. If we went with the purple area, and it also was found that it was still reflective of surviving historical boundaries, historical buildings, and ranging from villas, bungalows, and also pre-1940. So does anyone, before we go to questions for Rawene, does anyone who's in the live feed have any questions at this stage?
Angela, you'd popped your hand up very quickly before we moved to Rawene. Did you want to ask a question around Rawene?
Thank you. Well, it's more generally, sorry, I can't turn my camera on for some reason. It's hung, but have you got sound?
Yes, we have.
Yeah, thank you. It's just more generally about both locations. I live in Kohukohu. Rawene and Kohukohu are connected. They're not individual places. They're one place. They're connected across a very important river. And just a comment from a colleague, Lisa, who has just said, can council please remember that every detail counts? So in a heritage area, we have council installing, for example, lampposts and power poles and stuff that belong on an NZTA motorway or state highway. They don't belong in a heritage area. She negotiated very hard to get a power pole changed in colour from galvanised to a dark green. It seems that particularly in Kohuko and somewhat in Rawene, the property owners, the private property owners are the people who are protecting heritage. And council, in the stuff that they do, tend not to consider heritage and tend not to put in appropriate solutions. So when they pave surfaces and when they do all the little nuanced things around heritage, they just wipe it out. And the Kohu Heritage Guidelines, which are a beautiful document, talk about that, talk about nuance and softness and considering humans in the heritage space. And I just urge everybody working on this to read that document and to think really hard about council's impact on our heritage areas, on our heritage properties, because often council's moves are clumsy gestures and we need to get a lot more particular in the way that we protect our heritage.
Thank you very much for that feedback, Angela. I myself, I grew up in Umawera, which is just across across from Horticulture, but I grew up going to Kohuko for ice creams on the boat. So I do recognise, and I can see over the last 10 to 20 years how it's been revitalised through that heritage story and the value that the community has put into that. And I definitely see there is that strong relationship between the two settlements because you've got the Narrows and that connection with the ferry and just the relationship with the two teams. One of the benefits we can we can see if we with this refresh of our heritage areas is that we can try to tailor the rules to get the right outcomes in the public space as well. So when you have land within a heritage area, regardless of ownership, we can still regulate it. So council would be required, as you say, to reflect the values that that community is giving to that settlement. So if you've got concerns that the rules are not going to get the right outcomes in the public space, then that's really important you convey that to us as well, so we can have a look to see how are we regulating that infrastructure as well, so that you don't get this disconnect that you're talking about, Angela. Also, by enlarging the area, if that is obviously where it ends up, wherever that is, then that does mean greater protection for those areas as well. If that's where the community in Russell also wants that higher standard of development to occur in terms of in the public space, for example.
Thank you.
That's great feedback, guys. I'm conscious that we are running slightly behind schedule and there are lots of other great questions and comments. John's just got his hand raised. John, if you've got just some quick comments that you want to add in before we move to the next question.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Angela, for that comment. Look, it's really important to recognise that this is the opportunity to talk about the identity of your place and what matters to you. This is partly, why the approach has changed from previous approaches, because it's an understanding that these places are special. They have unique stories, and they're not just about sort of villa fretwork or things like that. So that includes the public realm, that includes how a place is presented to the wider world. And I think it's important to note that there's opportunities there through this kind of process to identify as well, not just talking about constraints. Thank you.
That's great, thanks.
Okay, I think we can move on to the next area. The question that was raised in registration has been answered, that if you're in a heritage area, then that could trigger the need for a resource consent if you build. So if we can jump to the next one. Okay, Porirua. Oh, sorry.
Rawene?
Yes, certainly.
So I think everyone's agreed Rawene's a very historic part of New Zealand, and there's some quite significant buildings and areas to be protected. But the extension here takes in the bulk of the residential area, and it's put an impost now on all the people who just have a regular, like, vacant block of land or a regular house, and suddenly they've got all these overheads if they want to do anything. And so you've got to look at the context of the whole town. If you're going to lock up 80% of the town, you're just killing the town. How do you get development? If anyone's going to do development, they're going to move out of the Rawene area where they don't need to go through all the extra processes. So my question is, why is regular residential vacant land and existing houses being included?
That's probably best answered by John, who looked at the area and put forward the recommendation. So he'd be able to
I can handle that one, Tammy. So just to recognise that this is about identifying from a historical perspective the genesis of the township, and that the area identified is that original township area. So it's an area of interest. It doesn't necessarily at this stage translate into more or less statutory requirements. It's about refining how, as a community, you want to respond to that suggestion. So I understand the concern. I obviously been going through the process in other areas as well, but the interest is not necessarily in trying to prevent development. It's about understanding what's interesting and unique about Rawene as a place and its historical development, and how that might inform development in the future.
Yes, so Peter, what that means is this is probably generic across all the heritage areas, that when we're looking at something spatially, the extent of it, that is where we're just trying to work out, firstly, have we got are we looking at the right area in terms of where we see the significant heritage that should be appropriately managed? We have many different tools that we can then use to manage that. So as been discussed earlier in the conversation, is that this is just a starting point. It could be that with lines move. It could be the methods in which we ensure we get the right outcomes change. It could be that we have design guidelines. We could be that heritage funds. It could be that you do in some instances require a resource consent, but not in all instances. Or you could even have a tiered approach where you could have a core area where you have the heaviest regulation, and then you have a different framework as you come out of that core area. So these are all questions that we're trying to tease out from communities to understand where is the area that they definitely no, this is where we do want it regulated because this is where we want it to get the maximum ensured certainty that we're going to get certain outcomes. And these might be other areas where we're like, yes, it's part of that heritage values, but we could manage it in a different way. So that's why we've come out to the community to get that feedback to help us refine what we're doing. And that's across all the heritage areas.
Thanks, Tammy. That's really interesting clarification, and it provides lots of context
so
for
we
all
could
of our
probably
areas.
Yeah.
I'll move you along to the next slide. I am very conscious that we
Yes,
are running behind on time, and I guess there's lots of question time afterwards where if we've got some quite technical questions like that, we can have a bit more of an engaging conversation about it later on down the track.
Okay, so we've got Porirua. So if we probably just jump straight to the next slide, which will show the change in the extent that was suggested in the plan. We've got one question. We've got some people who have raised some questions in advance. So Aisha, do you want to highlight that, or would you like me to call out the names?
I have been looking through those that are here today. I'm not sure if Peter is here, whether or not she's here to ask her question, but Sam was here earlier. Sam Chapman-Smith, you had a question in relation to this area?
I think Sam's just put his hand up.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, I suppose it was in relation to this area, but it's probably just in general too. Is I understand it's a draft proposed area, and I was just wondering what's the process and thresholds that are being looked at and considered in terms of what would be required to make that go ahead.
I'm not too sure what you mean by, sorry, Sam, thresholds.
Well, it's a draft proposed change in a boundary.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess there's an outcome where it happens, just as you've shown it, or there's an outcome that it doesn't.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I was trying to understand what are the thresholds that influence that, or that we would need to know about.
Okay, like the steps involved.
Or what's the threshold of support that's needed to, or not to make the changes.
Oh, okay. From a community perspective,
yeah.
I think that's what. Yep. All right. Thank you for clarifying that. So we're coming through on a second round of engagement. So what we'll do is we take into account what we received back in March and April. We'll take into account what we received through this process. It may be determined through this process that we need to do some further work with communities. So that will, if that occurs, that will also influence it. We also have to get that feedback, as I've mentioned before, from also tangata whenua, to have that feed into the process. We'll also have other agencies such as Heritage New Zealand as well, providing feedback as to their level of support for it. Now, the way in which we work with as well, we've got the Resource Management Act, but we also have the regional policy statement that sits above district plans for the region. And that document has specified a criteria of how you look at these areas. So, well, we will definitely work with the community, but we still have a framework that we have to work to, and that framework will also influence some outcomes. But community is definitely a big part of that. So certainly if we're getting feedback from a community that says what you've put out is not what we think is appropriate, well, then we will endeavour to work to find that right balance.
Mike, I see you've got your hand raised, but I'm going to just welcome Fiona to the conversation because we haven't heard from her. Fiona, did you have a question? You've just taken your hand down, so I'm presuming you don't.
Okay. I might then, should I just have a look at some of the questions that have been raised through the registration and just see if we've answered them or not?
Alec Jack.
Oh, Alec. Okay, sorry.
Here as well. He had submitted a question for registration. Welcome, Alec.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, our internet's not very good out here, and I could say that for a lot of people in our area. So I'd just like to, first of all, talk all the comments made by those who are unhappy with the level of community engagement. And by that, I refer to just general education as to what we're looking at. I'd like to invite you to attend a public meeting at the Pakaraka Hall. But my question, I guess, given that we don't have a lot of opportunity, just sort of deciding which one to ask. For those ratepayers being brought into the Pourua heritage area for the first time, please give 5 examples of activities and land use changes which will require permission from council or iwi.
Oh, sorry, could you just, say that again? I didn't quite. 5 examples of.
Hang on. 5 examples of activities or land use changes which will require permission from council or iwi. What I'm just trying to get at here is
what type of development?
Species tree planting,
Oh, I see.
excavation,
Yep.
what the
No,
sort
I
of
get it.
things
Yep.
that people
Type of
who haven't
activities.
been in the area for a long time like
Yep.
we have,
Yep.
for whom it will be new.
Yep. I understand. Sorry about that. So yeah, you are correct. There's different scenarios under the Resource Management Act and the way a district plan works. So say, for example, if someone, as you say, has already built or they're already undertaking a farming activity, then they've done their development, they have existing use rights. But if you had someone, as you say, who came in on a vacant section, or it could be even someone's wanting to do something new on their property they haven't done before. So the types of activities that can be regulated through resource consents and heritage areas would be a new building, an extension to an existing building. It would be a certain volume of earthworks. It would be also potentially if you had like a notable tree on your property and you wanted to prune or remove it, that could also be regulated. If you were also wanting to put signage up on your property for a business, or even if someone approached you because you're on a state highway for visibility. So does that give a good range of examples?
Yeah, I mean, I was also thinking about, the world has changed. We're in a climate emergency. I've got ruminants grazing, a massive area of pastoral land. What about conversion from pastoral farming to horticulture?
Yeah, so, yep. Mm-hmm. And I'm also mindful that obviously there's been a government investment in the region as well for irrigation dams in the Waimati North and Ohio area. So it is likely, as you've mentioned, there, and as we're seeing, government incentives and just changing environment where people are moving more into horticulture. So if someone was in a heritage area, that conversion in terms of earthworks that may be required to support that conversion could trigger the need for a resource consent. Also, depending if you say, for example, had kiwi fruit, it could be that the built infrastructure that you'd put in as well, your artificial charter belts if you went down that road, and also the support structures.
Fiona, would you like to make a comment or a question? I see your hands raised, but you're currently on mute. There we go. Sorry, Fiona, we're having a few issues hearing you at the moment.
Can you hear me now?
We can.
Oh, rural broadband, the joys thereof. I just wanted to ask, and it may help for other people, I don't know if it is written somewhere, to know what the actual heritage and cultural significance of the new larger enclosed area to the southwest of the existing precinct in Puirua. So going from the edge of where it was out to a Marshall Road, you know, we're farmland. What is the cultural and heritage significance? What is here that we don't know about that we should know about? And why that huge I mean, you've practically doubled it.
John, would you be able to answer that question?
Yeah, essentially the initial area is based largely on a combination of the elements on the landscape like the lake, and then but across that area there's quite a lot of recorded archaeological sites on the NZAA database. Now, in terms of a wider area of influence, that might be something that appears as an alert layer, for example, so that people are aware that they might need to engage with Heritage New Zealand around authorities for modifying archaeological sites and so on. So it's not necessarily directly triggered to some of the council roles, but it might be the council has a responsibility as a territorial authority under those acts, both the RMA and the Heritage New Zealand Act, to identify potential risks from development or other activities.
So when you have the line that finishes not quite at the end of Smith Road, what's the difference between that paddock and the one adjacent to it? Why do you draw the line there?
Well, that was largely on the basis of historical certificates of title, land ownership records, and relationships of those people historically with early communities. So those again are areas that would be potentially refined through consultation process.
Is there somewhere that we can look at these sort of what you base your findings on? Why you find it significantly important? Is there something that we can also look at?
Yeah, those statements of significance are the sort of summary statements that have been prepared on that basis following the criteria from the regional plan. So that's the driver, if you like, the regional plan criteria. You're asked to look at these historical associations, the previous land use, the locations of associated sites. So they might not be all necessarily located together, but they might be related through a particular personal event. An example of that would be World War II defences around the coast. So, those are the factors in which the initial statement has been prepared, and they're obviously there to provide a point to begin the conversation. It's based on the information that I had available during the period I had to do that work. There's certainly potential for additional information to be reviewed and looked at and so on.
Okay, thank you.
Maybe that
for your questions. Yeah, sorry, Tammy.
I was just going to say maybe that just highlights for those who may not be aware. We have put the 2 reports that were written for council on our council website that were done by Plan Heritage. That's John's firm. So if people haven't read that report yet, that's available online, and that gives a lot more context as to why John has suggested the lines that in effect have been come through on the draft.
Amber, I see you've raised your hand as well, and I see you've put a question in the chat. Hopefully you're going to forgive me. I'm going to move us to the next slide so we can just carry on having this conversation. We will be picking up questions later on, as well as answering questions offline afterwards. So please be rest assured that any questions asked during the session will receive an answer, but due to the time constraints, possibly not within session.
I can also advise I can do a very broad comment about earthworks, I think, which will address all the heritage areas too.
It's a great opportunity too, sorry, Tammy, just to encourage you to pop your questions into the chat, and then those that are providing responses can try and weave answers into existing answers and try and provide a broad canvas so that we can try and provide you with as much information as possible. Thanks, Tammy.
Thanks for clarifying that, Aisha. So now we've got Te Waimati. So if we go straight to the slide, I think that's the most useful slide I think people are finding. So with this one, you can see the dotted line is the existing heritage precinct, and then the aqua colour is what we call the Waimati North Special Zone. So what we were suggesting for this area is that we would not have a special zone anymore. Instead, we would have a heritage area managing that historic heritage landscape and those heritage values, and that's the extent of the area that was put forward in the draft as a starting point. So one of our concerns was with the Waimati North special zone is that it was not been as effective as it could be in managing that heritage landscape. And so we have a couple of questions were raised. I'm not too sure if Sue or Daryl are here today, but one of the questions were more about the spatial extent. So maybe I'll just quickly talk about earthworks while we're here. So each heritage area potentially could have different thresholds for what earthworks allowances there could be without requiring a resource consent. So for example, you've got currently in the current plan in the Russell Heritage Precinct down at the Strand, which is along the waterfront, it has very restrictive rules. It only allows, I think, 2 cubes of earthworks over a 5 square metre area. Then you come into other heritage precincts in the current plan, and there is not that level of control. In the draft, we brought across the more restrictive rules in the Kerikeri and Russell heritage areas, reflective of what's currently in the plan, and we were suggesting a higher thresholds for the other areas. So does that answer your question, Amber? I will take it as a yes, unless you put something else in the chat.
Sorry, I've just been distracted for a second.
Oh, that's all right.
My family. Yeah, so I didn't quite catch the end of that.
Oh, okay.
So the session it's being recorded. I'm really conscious that there are other questions that we need to get to. So hopefully, Amber, you'll be able to watch back on the recording to see the response. Tammy, the two that had asked questions in relation to this Te Waimati area are in the call, but they had signalled they didn't want to ask their questions live. So one of them was just around the boundaries and how we form them, with a view that the way that we do that is somewhat arbitrary. We have already answered some of those questions in relation to how we form the boundaries and how we assess the areas. And obviously, part of this process is that we want people to tell us if we've got them in the right or wrong places, which leads to the next question, was specific as to why Courthouse Lane and the Waimati North wasn't as included in the area.
Yeah, I can just field that one. So the process that I took for all of the areas, as noted previously, is the same process. We look at the historical land titles, the historical plans and deposited plans. We look at the aerial photography, and we look at the spatial arrangement of recorded and known sites and what we might consider to be the archaeological potential. And so the Te Waimati area has been defined on that basis. I did note in my assessment that there might be areas of revision that could come through during the consultation, but similar to the other areas, that's the process. So there's been a systematic process for each area based on the availability of historical data, essentially.
Thanks, John. So Tammy, just moving on to our 5th of the 9 areas.
Thank you. So the next one we have is Rangihora. Now, Rangihora is a little bit different in our current plan. That is an alert layer rather than having rules associated with it. So what the main changes that we're proposing in the new plan is it not being a non-statutory layer, that it comes in like the other heritage areas in the plan, and there would be a set of rules and a policy framework that would apply to it. So because it's an alert layer in the current plan, it shows it going out onto the coastal marine area. The way that it works, you've got regional plans and district plans. As we are responsible for a district plan, we can only regulate things that happen on land. So the reason why the area is different is we cannot come out and regulate what happens on the water. So we're proposing that we just regulate the northern side on the land. So that's the change there for there. I don't believe we've got any questions that were posed in the registration for this area. So unless someone has a particular area about Rangihora, we might be best to move on to another area where there might be more interest to ask some questions.
The next couple of areas are quite big changes. So I think if we move on, and if anyone does have any questions in relation to Rangihora, please feel free to put them in the chat.
Okay, so the next one we've got is Kirikiri. So with that one, if we jump to the slide, the next one, sorry. So you can see once again the change that was put in the draft, that purple, the larger purple line is the suggested area. Now, as what I've been talking about earlier in the presentation, we have a couple of precincts that are a little bit different from the other ones in that they have buffer areas around it. So what you see is you've got the dotted line, which is the precinct, and then you have this pink line that wraps around it, which is a buffer area. So it's like a tiered approach in the way in which the current plan manages it. You have slightly different rules for development in the pink area, and the much more restrictive rules within the land that within the dotted black area. So just having a look at Kirikiri. We don't appear to have had any questions posed to us through the registration process on that. So once again, I'd ask if anyone
Sorry, Tammy, there was just one.
Oh, sorry, did I
and
read that?
It does apply for all of these areas. It was
Oh, I
just around
see,
whether
sorry.
or not those in the heritage areas will have to pay higher rates than what they currently do.
Oh, I see, sorry. Rates are at the end of what we're looking at through the Resource Management Act is how to best manage the heritage values of an area. In terms of rates, the current model that this council has is rates are triggered on land value. So in theory, it's not a direct relationship there.
I guess it's a difficult question to answer, but rates are a very technical thing. Having a different zoning area, regardless of whether or not it's heritage, commercial or residential, doesn't necessarily mean you'll get a higher rating through council's current rating system.
I suppose one thing I would raise, though, however, depending on how communities in the district might want to manage these heritage values, if the community and the district and there is an appetite to move more into the non-statutory framework where you would be supporting landowners, for example, you're designing guidelines, or you have a heritage fund or incentives. So, for example, a resource consent might be required, but if it was work on a heritage building, that resource consent would be free of charge in terms of the council costs. So that would have a relationship with rates because those would have to be funded through the rating take. So there is, so it all depends on different paths we may go down.
So our next area we've received lots of questions about. Did you want to do a bit about introduction?
Yeah, thank you. So Pi, here's our next one. So basically we did had some feedback in the March one on that, that asked to retain the existing area. And if we go to the next slide, you'll see the spatial change that was in the draft. So you've got the area down there on the foreshore, which is the black dotted line, which is the existing precinct. And then you have the larger area that was in the draft. Now, that was to more heavily integrate what has been raised before about acknowledging that broader story in terms of early Maori settlement and also other very important areas, for example, down, where the village green is and along the foreshore. So I'll just have a look to see what questions we have here.
There were 3 that had asked permission to ask their questions live for the session. One of them from Chester, who was just asking why. So I'm hoping his question's already been answered. And I guess if I just use this as an opportunity for Ross and Richard to prepare to ask their questions. Oh, Chester has raised his hand. Chester, did you want to elaborate on your question around why we're doing this?
Yeah, hi. Can you hear me?
Can hear you, yes.
Okay. I accept that this is a sort of an introductory type of thing, but I'd like to draw your attention to the brochure that you sent out. And one of the headings on it that says, "Why are we hearing about this plan?" And there's the second sentence says, "We received feedback from about 450 people or organisations on the draft district plan. Many people requested that we do further engagement on heritage areas and contact all property owners affected by the changes." Now, quite honestly, council have failed to, and it's carrying on a little bit from what Mike Burns' comments, that I have been talking to maybe up to 40 or 50 property owners in this area, and I would say the majority of them, this whole thing is news to them. So I just want council to take that on board, because the deadline for submissions to this exercise is the 13th of October. I accept that there are times after that to put submissions in, but your deadline, as far as we're concerned, is the 13th of October. And given that there are about 132 properties in your new area, and there's probably 250 to 300 owners in that area, I think that consideration should be given for them to get together out of lockdown and talk about these things. The process you're doing today is fine, but it is not practicable under the current conditions. And I also advise that the area that you've increased there is a lot of commercial property in there, and accommodation and tourism. And those guys, quite frankly, over the last 12 to 18 months have been trying to keep their business wheels on, let alone worrying about reading a 269-page report on what you guys plan. I'm also interested in why you chose this particular area of Paihia. If you are seriously talking about heritage, I would have thought you would have picked the whole area from Waitangi right through to Opua. Not just this area. If you're talking about early European history, and even Russell in that area, the whole area is a heritage area. So I'm a bit, I don't really understand why you've picked a certain area out and what the difference between one side of Totara Heights Drive is and the other on heritage values. So And the last one I want to get across is to the district council is that you guys are there to represent ratepayers. It's the ratepayers that pay you guys your salaries. Therefore, we would expect you to have an attitude that would try and communicate with your ratepayers to achieve the ambitions of everybody. But we're the people, you're the people that are supposed to be looking after us. And we would expect that sort of stuff.
Thanks, Chester, for joining us in this session. I'm sure the councillors are taking on board your comments in terms of how we've drafted the areas and how we select what is or isn't within a heritage area. We have already covered that question. Richard, you've raised your hand and you did also want to ask a question in live chat, so I'll invite you to the floor now.
Hi there. Can you hear me?
Yes, welcome.
Great. I just got a couple of quick questions. I'm not sure if they've been answered, but because I came in quite late, so possibly. But I just want to know, is there going to be any retrospective application of proposed heritage zoning, this new heritage zoning for existing property? Another question is there going to be any change to the maximum height of new builds under this proposed heritage zoning?
Thanks for your questions. So if I've understood the first question, are you concerned that if someone's already done a development, if the heritage area comes on top of that property, that they'll have to get a retrospective consent? Is that the question?
Yes, or is there are they going to expect any change to existing properties as they stand?
No. The way that the Resource Management Act works is if new rules come into place through the creation of a new plan or new rules, anything that's happened before that, as long as it was lawfully established, is not affected. So we can't go back and expect someone to meet a rule that didn't exist when they did their development. So that wouldn't happen. In terms of does that answer the question, or have I not hit the mark
You've
there?
answered that. That's
Okay,
great. I was just
excellent.
wondering about the maximum height of new builds.
Yep.
It's
So
only changed.
at this point in time, no, we're not proposing that. We're proposing that the underlining zoning that would apply. So as has been mentioned by Chester before, you've got a mixed range of development in that area. So you've got commercial and you've got residential. So no, we're not proposing to not acknowledge though that your height rules reflect those types of activities.
Okay, thank you.
So there's been some really good discussion in the chat, and I just wanted to invite Teresa from our staff to try and answer some of those questions before we move on to Margaret.
Good, thanks, Aisha. So I guess I'm addressing Amber's question here, discussions with iwi authorities and Hapu to get their feedback on how these resources should be managed. That will help shape the final outcome. Yes, those that corridor and those discussions are ongoing currently. We're in that engagement process as we speak. You had another one also earlier about tangata whenua wanting their taonga managed under the same umbrella as heritage colonial settlements. We've had a specific request in the Te Waimate heritage area for Okorotope Pa to be included in that heritage area, and it is because the pre-European Okorotope Pa was so densely populated and settled, and that's the reason why the Waimate mission station is there. So the narrative, the inclusive narrative is what we want to bring about through the development of the wider heritage settlement, including more of the sites of cultural significance and the marae and so on. And that request has come from the Hapu and marae there. There was one more, I think. Rohe, yes, I totally acknowledge that council, lack of faith in council to protect the taonga. We wouldn't be including anything in these heritage areas that haven't either already been included, such as identified as the site of cultural significance, power sites and so on, and nominated from Hapu and iwi without that corridor. So it's things that have already been identified in our Appendix 1F.
Thanks, Teresa.
Hopefully that answers those questions.
Would it be all right, Aisha, if I just, sorry, there's some questions here that I think apply across the whole heritage areas. Would it be all right if I briefly just say something that I think would answer a few questions?
Go for it.
Thank you. So some questions have been raised over why have we just looked at these areas rather than, for example, at Waitangi and other areas. So the focus of this piece of work that was to look at our existing heritage precincts and to see if, basically to go and check to see if we needed to do anything differently, spatially or rule-wise. So that's why this conversation is targeted to these locations. Through the overall district plan review, communities, individuals can put forward other areas that they would like us to consider. So for example, as a result of putting out the draft and going through this review process, we are in conversations with Heritage New Zealand, also the Waitangi Trust regarding what's the best way to manage that location as well. So we're not only looking at heritage in these locations, it's just that these are existing precincts which we're going back and checking to make sure we've got it right. And to see, you know, as has been mentioned before, 20 years down the track, we don't know what the community may be thinking now as well. So people who were living there 20 years ago, or the way in which people may have looked at a place can change as well. So also another question was asked, basically there was a concern raised that with being in a heritage area, that it would mean that all buildings from that point forward have to be built in the style of, say, like a building on the Russell waterfront. That is not the intent of a heritage area. It's a case-by-case scenario. So for example, if we're looking at Paihia, which we currently are, you don't have that same built environment that you have in Russell. So when we're looking at a consent, if it did come through a consent or design guidelines, then we take into account the context of the location and the values we're trying to manage. So we would not, if you had an existing house that was built in the 1970s, expect you to put an extension on that replicated the a villa built in 1890, or that if you or controlling the colour of how that building was painted, because you have a mixed bag of colours in this location, for example. So it is a case-by-case scenario. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach for the heritage areas, and we're certainly not trying to, where it's not appropriate, make people build, you know, buildings that are reflective of early 1900s, 1800s. So if that's a concern, I can assure you that that's not the intent of this protection.
Thanks, Tammy. As promised, I'm going to invite Margaret to unmute. Margaret had during registration mentioned that she has several questions. So hopefully, Margaret, we've answered some of that for you here. But if you'd like to just ask questions or provide any comments before we go on to the remaining questions that we have for the Paihia area.
Yes, thank you. Before I start, I would just like to endorse a number of things that Chester mentioned before, especially about notification. And my son mentioned earlier on that we had not had any notification whatsoever, and to find that any submissions are due by the 13th is somewhat alarming. As a ratepayer, I don't feel as though the council is working for me. I feel that the council is working against me. Another point was that the first speaker, Darren Edwards, mentioned a number of reasons that this historic area should be put into place. It appears to me that many of those reasons already exist under the current rules or bylaws, such as resources for earth removal, etc. And finally, I feel like as landowners, we are having our rights reduced, that my rights to my own property are being eroded. Aren't there already enough resource consent requirements in place to protect an area which is already fully developed? Thank you.
Thanks, Margaret, for sharing some of your views, and Tammy for reminding us of some of the principles of why we're looking at these heritage areas. We know that council in general can cause a lot of frustration for people, so it's really good that you're happy to share those with us today. I'm just going to invite Greg from staff to remind us again and talk a little bit more around the process.
Hey, thanks very much, Aisha, and thank you, Margaret and Chester, for those questions around here and process. I just wanted to give you just a brief overview of so there's some broader context with the plan making. You're probably aware that we've got an operative district plan that manages land use and subdivision. We have to review that plan before it gets 10 years old. So that review process started in about 2016 and has had a number of phases getting us towards this point today. We are also required to bring into our plan making higher order plans that tell us or direct us, hey, think about this or do this. So National Planning Standards was a good example that Tammy provided before. We now have an electronic plan that has a very conventional structure that other plans will have as well. The plan also has a much more enabling approach in terms of here's the land uses that are permitted and here's the land uses that need control. So it's a more of an activities-based approach than what we currently have. In general, I could suggest that the plan is more enabling for urban environments and near urban environments for development outcomes. So there's big shifts in the new plan from what we currently have. And that represents some of these demand issues we have around the country for housing, affordable housing, for example. It takes into account economic well-being, but it doesn't stop the other issues. We do have to blend into this process and make sure we get integrated management, matters of national importance. And so by having a draft, it means that we can share that story with our communities, and we're inviting them into the space to say, well, how does this all look as a whole? And in the draft process, we're also having further targeted discussions such as this about district planning, heritage areas. So when there's requests for further feedback, that's something we're thinking about. So we're hearing all the things that you're telling us today, and we'll have some further evaluation about how we best meet those needs. Thank you.
Thanks, Greg. I want to just pull that point. It's really important that people understand this is an initial conversation. There will be opportunities to provide feedback and have further conversations, either one-on-one or as groups potentially, as we move forward with this process. I do appreciate that there's quite a few of you that I haven't allowed the opportunity to speak. I'm really conscious that we are limited on time today. We have 2 more of the 9 heritage areas that I want us to just touch on, and then we'll move to some closing comments and more of a Q&A general conversation session. Tammy, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you. So the next area is Russell. So if we go to the Russell map, that'd be great. Thank you. So Russell is one of 2 existing heritage precincts that also has a special zone that works with the heritage precinct. So the area that's highlighted in yellow is currently the Russell Special Township Zone. So part of the suggestion in the draft is that became a general residential zone. Then you've got in Russell, the heritage precinct for that area was broken into 3 areas: the Strand, the Christchurch and Wellington Street, and then they had a buffer area around it as well, which, as I've highlighted before, is the pink area as per Kerry. Kerry had that model. So with Russell, it's been proposed that we slightly extend the extent of the heritage area to those down to the headlands, and we slightly modify it as you come into the town, and that we have just a singular heritage area rather than a buffer area because of the significant values there in the buffer area as well. So those were the main changes there. We have got some questions. I don't know, Aisha.
3 people that responded from the Russell area that they had questions. I think the first one around the impact on existing builds and future builds, and the differentiation between the current rules and the new rules has already been covered off.
Yep.
There was one who said they didn't have any specific questions. Hi, Christine, has her hand raised at the moment to speak, so I'll call you in shortly. The third question was just around how will iwi for this and all our areas be engaged further, which I think Teresa's covered off as well. Christine, would you like to unmute and share your questions for us to consider?
Okay, here we go.
Right, can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay. My name is Bob Dre and I represent the Russell Protection Society. First, I'd just like to acknowledge that in April, we had a very well-attended public meeting with the council. And at that meeting, it was virtually unanimous that the community wanted to retain its 3 heritage areas, its gateway area, and its special zoning. And I need to acknowledge that council has had ample opportunity now to reflect those views in its proposed draft district plan and has chosen not to do so. I'd just like to background how the existing plan came into fruition. And that was based on a Russell planning study. A handbook was produced and a specific review of the Russell planning study was undertaken during the process of formulating the current district plan. Ultimately, that was the plan we have now is the result of submissions, appeals, and decisions by the Environment Court, a number of decisions. I'd like to just background what it is in the existing district plan that we would like to retain. The district plan acknowledges, well, there are 2 basic things. One is our distinct heritage areas, and the other is the special zoning for Russell. And we need to acknowledge that the council has rolled over a number of other special zones in its proposed draft district plan. But the existing plan acknowledges that the 3 heritage precincts in Russell are distinctly different. And therefore, there are context statements for each one of the heritage precincts. There are also objectives, policies, methods, rules, assessment criteria, etc., which pertain specifically to each one of the distinct heritage precincts. Those include controls over colors, different controls over colors, visibility, new structures, parking and access, and alterations to land that are specific to one or other of the existing heritage precincts. Now you're proposing to roll it into 1 heritage area, and we have every real concern that the lowest common denominator will reflect that overall heritage area. There's no way the council is in fact going to craft something as specific as the existing Strand Heritage Precinct and apply it to the whole of the heritage area. So we're seeing a watering down, if you'd like, of our heritage areas. But more particularly, we now have an underlying zoning proposed for the heritage area, which is a development zoning. And that's not only the underlying zoning for the heritage areas, but the surrounding areas. And it's totally incompatible. The now general residential area that's being proposed in place of the Russell special zone proposes in more intensive infill development, increased heights, and subdivision in some cases down to 300 square meters. That is totally incompatible with heritage areas, and there'll simply be a conflict between the 2. So,
Thanks for your feedback. Sorry to interrupt. I am incredibly conscious that we are running short on time. It was great to hear that you've got a lot of background knowledge on how the existing overlays were established, and we've heard that district plan lifespan is around 10 years, so you've obviously got a lot of knowledge. I'm going to invite the team to have a one-on-one conversation with you offline for you to share some more of that knowledge and some of your comments. But obviously, there is also that submission period where you can put in any of your comments so that we can put them into consideration. Tammy, did you want to just add
if I could just
like
to add, this is Christine. We have in fact made all these submissions, and we have in fact invited you again to come and speak with us. You're not hearing what we're saying. And
I'm sorry you feel that we're not hearing you. The process is very clear that it's a submission process, and I'm incredibly mindful that we've got somewhat 46 people sitting in the session.
Would
it be possible for me to just to respond?
Saying, if you continue to ignore our submissions, we'll see you in the Environment Court.
If it would be all right, if, as Aisha mentioned before, I'd just like to respond. Yes, I'd just like to respond if that's okay. So yes, I was in attendance at that public meeting, and I'm well aware of the concerns that have been raised by the Russell community. As through the second engagement process, we wanted to send a letter to all landowners, not only just in the heritage area for Russell, but we also made the decision to send letters to every landowner also in the Russell Special Township Zone. Now, the reason we haven't brought out another draft is because we were basically bringing it out to everyone and giving everyone an opportunity to comment on it. We wanted to present what had come out in March again. So we certainly have heard what you've said. In the letter that we wrote out to landowners, we acknowledged the feedback that we'd received in the March-April engagement process, where there had been a lack of community support for the approach that we had put forward. I can assure you, we certainly are looking at whether the draft should continue with removal of a special zone. We are also looking at whether we should be reintroducing the individual heritage areas. So we certainly have heard what you've said. We are going back and we're looking at things. Because we were coming out and we were writing to individual landowners, we needed to represent what we'd put out in March. So it's not a case of saying we are not hearing what you're saying. We certainly are not going to continue with the draft as it is for Russell. We are going back and we are looking at things based on the feedback that we are receiving.
Can you advise as to when you send that letter out? I never received one, and the people that are sitting next to me didn't receive it either.
And I am a landowner.
Okay, we sent that on the week of the 15th of September. So that was the earliest that we could do it post-lockdown in terms of having access to being able to come into council. So we did a big mail run where we pulled it from the rates database is how we generate the letters. So the information on the rates database is how we posted out the letters.
Thanks, Tammy, for the clarification. I'll just move us to the next slide, and I'll just remind everyone again that we do have a Q&A session at the end of this session. So we'll invite you again if we've got the time to ask some more general questions at the end.
Okay, so the next one is Mongonui and Arangitato Peninsula. So if we go to the next slide, you can see the change there. So the change here is you've got the dotted line, which is reflective of the existing heritage precinct for Mongonui, and the draft was looking at the extending it across the harbour as well because of the relationship between those two areas historically. So Mongonui is reflective of Russell in that we received a lot of feedback in the March-April process. It was requested through that feedback that we did engage with all landowners. So we've gone through that process this time and when we sent the letters out in September, and we apologise to anyone who hasn't received any, but I can assure you the intent was to get the letters to everyone. We also represented what was put in the draft, as I explained before, to the Russell community, is because sending a letter out to landowners, we wanted everyone to have an equal opportunity to see what came out in March and April, to have an opportunity to provide us feedback on it.
Thanks, Tammy. Just before we go to questions in relation to the Mongonui Arangitato Peninsula, there's been another bit of a conversation taking place in the chat where Sam and Alec have been asking some questions around the iwi Hapu engagement. Teresa, would you like to just respond to those questions?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Aisha. So just broadly on tangata whenua engagement, we have engaged with the 11 mandated iwi authorities in our district for the purposes of RMA, and not through Te Kaho Tānui, but individually. And we've met face to face with them on the whole plan. And then for this round of engagement, we also touch base with relevant mandated iwi authorities and Hapu who have management plans with us, also on the heritage areas. So for Poidua, is we engage with Ngāpuhi, and we are talking with them about, because we know, of course, Ngāpuhi is Hapu-centric, about working through takiwā to engage with Hapu on this work as well. I hope that answers your questions.
Thanks, Teresa. There were Keith, Ian and Craig that have asked to speak to their questions in relation to this area. I also see Cheryl Bainbridge has her hand raised. I know that Cheryl is...
I just want to know if Ian's here and whether he wishes to speak, please.
He is present and he has indicated a desire to speak.
Okay,
Cheryl,
thank
I just
you.
wondered, as the community board rep for this particular area, whether or not you wanted to say anything first.
I've got a few questions, but I'd rather give the time to Ian, please, initially. Thank you.
There you go, Ian. Ian's got clever too. He's worked out how to change his name in the Teams chat. Ian, are you there?
Doesn't seem to be. If he comes in, I'll stop talking.
He is here and he's raised his hand. I'm assuming he's having some issues with his mic. So Ian's put in the chat that he's having some issues unmuting. Ian, are you able to try again, please? While Ian's trying to work his unmute button.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry, it wouldn't let me unmute until now. I've got quite a number of questions. I'm sure haven't got time to ask them all, so I'll be submitting my questions in writing. But and some are fairly specific. But at a high level, I guess my key question is particularly in relation to the Mongonui and Arangitato Peninsula Historic Heritage Area. What is the problem that you're trying to solve?
What we're doing at the moment is every 10 years a district plan has to be re-looked at and at the rules. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to go back and make sure that we're actually protecting the right heritage values for these areas. So we're wanting to have confidence that we're protecting the right things at the right level of protection. As a lot of people, as you come into Mongonui, I think a lot of people do see that those heritage values extending beyond the waterfront. We have got, obviously, you've got cultural values, you've got archaeological values, you've got built heritage values there. So we want to go back and just check that we're doing managing heritage in the right way and getting the right outcomes.
Yes, but as you know, Section 32 of the RMA defines a process to when you're proposing new policies and rules, and the Ministry of the Environment has given you guidelines as to how to go about that process. And guideline number 1, the first step, is you have to define the problem that you're trying to resolve. You can't just have a new set of rules for the sake of having a new set of rules. That you need to define what's going wrong now. I mean, if you're saying the problem is inappropriate development, I mean, what examples can you point to of inappropriate development, particularly where I am on the Arangitato Peninsula, because of the absence of these new rules? So you can't have it. You've defined the solution without defining the problem.
So what we have, Ian, is, as has been explained earlier on by Greg and John, we have had a change in the legislation that impacts on the district plan. So when the last district plan was written, we didn't have the regional policy statement. So we've gone back and had a look to make sure that we're aligning with that. So when I'm sure you've read the report, I think you have, that was written by John, and when he was looking at these heritage areas, he was using the criteria set down in the regional policy statement. Also, we have had concerns raised to us by groups such as Heritage New Zealand that the lack of spatial extent of heritage areas does result in poor outcomes for protection of archaeological sites, and also we've also had concerns with heritage areas not necessarily getting the right outcomes for cultural values either. So we do have some problems there that we are looking at. As we've explained, this is not necessarily where we're going to, this is not the finishing point, this is the start of the conversation.
But what poor outcomes can you give examples of that you're trying to solve with these new rules? Particularly, in my property, for example, 45 acres on the northern side of the Arangitato Peninsula, there are no old, let alone heritage listed buildings. In fact, there are no heritage resources that meet the criteria in the regional policy statement. So what inappropriate development can you point to on my property or the Arangitato Peninsula in general, other than that requires new rules?
So one of the things that was raised by Bob in the Russell community was concern over having the general residential zone apply to the Russell area. So that zoning also applies to the Mongonui area because of obviously the way in which we look at our urban environments have changed quite a lot in the last 20 years. With having that general residential zoning that comes in, it does mean that there's more enablement and development pressures that could come in on that area. So we were also looking at it in that context. In terms of a Section 32 report, when a final decision is made and we progress to notification of the plan, there will be, as you've highlighted, in an accompanying Section 32 report, which will outline and a breakdown of all the information that you're looking for. I'm not in a position to go through every single heritage area at this point in time and give that level of detail in this forum. But when you have a look at John's report, and John might want to speak to this, there is an assessment of risk, is there not, John, in your report for the different heritage areas?
Yeah, thanks, Tammy. There is an initial document in the Stage 1 report that sort of sets out some of the issues around the heritage precinct areas in a bit more detail. That was the starting point in terms of the review of the existing plan relative to drivers like the regional policy statement and national policy provisions. Since that was written, of course, there's also been new planning statements prepared by the government on urban development, which are also a factor coming into play in the not too distant future. So the sort of the genesis of the issues and options, if you like, is probably discussed there in terms of the existing plan and how it relates to new planning standards and environmental standards expected by the government-wide guidance and legislation approach. In terms of the Arangitato Peninsula in particular, the focus is on the archaeological sites, and I've received a fantastically detailed letter from you in the post today, which I really appreciate you taking the time to put together.
Thanks, John, for your comments. And I want to thank Ian as well for your questions. I'm just conscious that there's a little bit of feedback. We also have some other attendees who have registered and requested to speak that have raised their hand. And you may have all noticed a ribbon pop along the top to say that we've got 5 minutes left of this appointment. So I don't want you to feel rushed. We have received confirmation that we can extend this session for at least 15 minutes. So I'll take Keith, William, and potentially Craig, who at registration had signalled that they had some questions they wanted to ask in relation to this area. Keith, would you like to unmute?
Okay, I'm a property owner in Mongonui, and the property is part of the new zone. And while I think we all appreciate the old heritage zone, we sort of wonder why all of the other properties that 90% or 95% of which don't have any heritage standing are included. And it would be easier to go around and pick up maybe at tops 10 properties which could be considered of heritage value rather than blanketing an area. Now some of that you've covered, but it does seem to be a rather blanket approach to a problem which really isn't there. So, and that's a feeling from, you know, a lot of my neighbours and other property owners and that are now being included in that area.
Tammy, if I might just pick up on that briefly.
Certainly.
As we discussed previously, there was a systematic process that I went through in looking at the sort of historical genesis of areas based on town subdivision plans and so on. It's not necessarily about the merits of individual properties that in their own right would pass that regional policy criterion test, and certainly that's an alternative method of looking at heritage resources on an individual basis, and that is one of the things that was discussed in the stage 1 report that we put together. We also talked about non-statutory methods such as design guides and things which exist currently for Mongonui. So it very much it's about broadening that conversation out at this stage to receive that community feedback. And I appreciate you taking the time to raise those concerns, because that's the point of the process from my perspective.
Thanks. Does that answer hopefully that answers your questions. William, did you want to relay your question you asked during registration if it hasn't already been answered?
Yeah, so I just wanted, our concern as a family owning the property at Butler Point there is the blanket extension of the heritage area, basically covering, you know, the entire property, including areas that have no historical or heritage significance. And what we're concerned about is that there was really no attempt to accurately research and identify the areas of genuine significance that need both protection and resources. And I mean, our family has worked tirelessly for 51 years to preserve every aspect of the heritage values on that property, but to have huge tracts of the rest of the property dumped under this restriction is adding considerable irritation and potential expense and difficulty to managing the property. We thought that the research that was done, certainly on the Arangitato Peninsula and the Butler Point area, the quality of that research was a bit poor. And we think a lot more work needs to be done to look in more accurate detail at how these areas should be protected.
I'll just field that very quickly. I appreciate your feedback. Certainly it was a recommendation that consultation with landowners on that Arangitato Peninsula is part of the process, and that area might be refined through that process. So I acknowledge your comments, absolutely.
Thanks everyone for your discussion. It's really good that we can have free and frank discussion in the same way that we would public meetings. We do appreciate that having an online forum does not in any way, shape or form replace those sessions, and we do appreciate your patience with us today. Moving on to the next slide, I think it's important that we just close off where we were trying to go and the messaging that staff had to give you all through this session and for those that are going to watch it in the future. And then we can move on to the open Q&A session. Shall I hand it over to you, Greg?
Thank you, Aisha. And I really want to thank everybody for the really good discussion points and issues that have been raised today and prior to this forum. And it's an ongoing discussion, if I could reinforce that. So some of the things that we've heard is that there's lots of questions around the way that we are managing these issues, but we want to hear from you. And there's dot points there. Are we protecting the right things? Do we need to revise the draft areas? And if where to? And we're looking for reasons around this feedback. What does each community value? And we've got some really good feedback on these issues already. Have we got the rules right? So there's that spectrum of intervention. It could be rules, it could be advocacy, it could be other methods. There's a broad spectrum. Some things which are higher value resources might need more direct intervention. Places like Paihia, which has recently been through a plan change process to arrive at a distinct level of protection for a specified area. That's quite recent, but there's a change in the way that the district plan is having to operate, and there's change above us. So let's find the best way to find the best protection, and there might be other methods to tell the story for other areas beyond the places that have the highest values. And is there a better way to protect these important areas? If so, how? So this is the exchange. So the kinds of questions that we want to help you with is tell us, and we can exchange that with you. There is a period that is still open, but we're also hearing back from you that, hey, we need more time. So we're open to ways about how we can continue the discussion to ensure that we're getting the draft plan. This is a draft, it's open. It's kind of a sandpit location where we can try and test things. I think, if we can, even if, within your networks, you'll have really good networks of communities, and you might find ways that, hey, we think we can work better through these channels, and ask council these questions. We're open to ways about how we engage. So I've got a couple of other slides just quickly to go through. Thanks, Aisha, if you can move to that next one. So at the moment, we're looking at feedback closing on the 13th of October. We're getting great feedback, as we have since March, on the draft plan, and more specifically on heritage areas. So we'll be analysing that.
Leeway, Greg, into the next slide. Let me just.
Oh, sorry. thank you. I thought you moved on. Sorry, Ash. We'll be looking to see if there's further opportunities for further engagement. And also, what are the changes that are appropriate from what we've heard and our regulatory considerations about what we think is the best balance approach. Now, it's not the end of the process. It's been said a few times today, but what we've put together is part of a whole of change of the district plan framework. So you can see what these changes look like against the changes in the rest of the district plan. So the last time the plan was made was 2009. Things have moved on since then, and there's more growth. More people want to come and live here, and we have to make sure that the plan can enable growth, protect the things that are important to us and to our communities. So that's the balancing equation that we're trying to get better at. So there's a bit of a timeline laid out there for you. So this has been a piece of work that's been ongoing since 2016. We actually had a draft policy framework in 2018 that we tested with our communities. And as we move along this pathway, we're getting more specific about what are the methods that we arrive at to get the best outcomes. So in March this year, we put together a consolidated package of what the draft district plan looks like. And that was done mostly through COVID period last year. Some of our engagement preferences have been guided by COVID. So we're in this draft space, which is malleable. We're trying to get the best types of balances. But when there's another step before we notify the district plan, and that's taking our refined version to our council, who authorise us to say, okay, that can go to a proposed plan. That starts the statutory process of submissions, further submissions, hearings, and then recommendations to council from a hearing panel, and then council decisions. And after that, there's opportunities for appeals. So it's a very participatory process all the way along, and these steps are available to you. I'll also mention this is the last version of the Resource Management Act district plan that we'll have. So it's a great opportunity to have the input. There's new legislation being formulated, and so it may not be as participatory as this one. So let's make sure that we get the community and the balance into this space, and so we can get the best outcomes.
Thanks, Greg. It's really important for you guys to understand that this is, as we've said numerous times through this session, it's an initial conversation. We are open to having more conversations with you, either one-on-one, via email. We've got a Let's Plan Together email address. This is very clearly council's perspective of what we think the boundaries should be, and it is really important that we get your guys' feedback. I wanted to just take this opportunity to thank our councillors that have been in attendance today, and I'll just invite them to say something if they wish to, starting with Councillor Foy, who has her hand raised. Thanks.
Thank you for that. Aisha, can you hear me?
We can.
Great, thank you, Namahi. And thank you for all in attendance, hearing all of the concerns and the information provided. I just wanted to highlight what Mr. Wilson, what Greg has just said there, that this process does need to come through council, that this information has been released. It does not have statutory weighting. It's just draft at the moment. As part of this process, we're looking at where those lines are, where the heritage list, and we're also looking at the rules relating to that. So we may result in some new zones, for example. We could result in some different areas having different levels of protection, depending on the feedback. I just want all that. Usually what happens with planning, there are appeal processes that happen after the district plan, has weighting and has the formal submissions. And I think that we need to keep in mind that heritage values have a strong weighting under the RMA, and who might appeal in terms of heritage matters, and then sort of what's the middle ground that we can have to both provide for heritage as well as provide for development rights while protecting, and providing for that preservation of that heritage. Not just built heritage, but our our archaeological sites, our cultural heritage. So not just the built form of heritage. So I'm sure there's a medium ground that we can get to. And it sounds today that the staff are hearing. I can see that they're hearing those concerns, and also that we need to have more consultation and meetings. And Cheryl Bainbridge is here. I can see that, and she's had a lot of commentary around that. So thank you, Cheryl, for being an advocate, for example, on behalf of Mongonui. So I just wanted to highlight that as an elected member, and I'm sure all of the other elected members will be hearing about those things. And we'll take that away with staff and look at some of those rules, look at some of those lines where they're drawn, and look at some of the options to get some medium ground for a win for everyone.
Thanks, Councillor Foy. I guess just to remind everybody, councillors are elected on a district basis, but Councillor Foy is elected from our Te Haku ward. John Vucic is the next councillor I have on my list, who's elected from the Kaikuhokianga. Again,
thank you, Aisha.
The whole of the district.
I just want to thank everybody. It's been actually excellent to sit here and listen to many of the concerns, which I've actually heard from other places as well. I realise that Greg has got a lot on his plate, and there's statutory pressure as well, which is not very popular. I realise that, but also I think the way we can and should be doing consultation, as it was raised, is going out into the public and involving all those out there. I know it's difficult with COVID, but look, this has been excellent. I've taken a lot of notes, and I'll be handing adding comments to my fellow councillors going forward and what we can do and how we should do it. I appreciate that, and look to do some change in how we do this in the future. Thank you very much. Excellent. Bye.
Thanks, Councillor Vucic. I wanted to just also acknowledge Cheryl as, again, a community board member who's in the attendees participating with us today. We also have the Bay of Islands Whangarua Community Board Chairperson, Belinda Ward. No doubt they've got questions as well, but as part of their roles, I'm sure they'll continue to represent your views. And Manuela, who is another community board representative on the Bay of Islands Whangarua Ward. Sorry, Manuela, I missed you in the list. I'm going to hand it over now to Teresa and our technical staff. Again, there's been a lot of conversations in the chat around our involvement with tangata whenua and how we approach those conversations. Teresa?
Oh, kia ora, Asia, thanks. Just to pick up on the comments in the chat, particularly from you, Alec. Sorry, I didn't mean to not identifying Ngāti specifically. Ngāti is one of the 11 mandated iwi authorities for the purposes of the RMA in our district, so they are being talked to individually in respect to these heritage areas as well. I should also just maybe take the opportunity to pick up on Cheryl Bainbridge's earlier question around the inclusion of Rangi Kapiti and Arangitato pā. The premise of their inclusion is not to add an extra layer of bureaucracy, but more to be inclusive of that Māori narrative, the pre-European narrative, and the significance of those two headland pā at the entrance of the Mongonui harbour, and the stories surrounding the early pre-European context there, all around that area, and the economic contact with whaling in on Butler's Point and so on. So that's the purpose of including those, to include that story.
Thanks, Teresa.
Thanks, Aisha.
Councillor Clendon was having a few technical issues, like many of us do in the far north. Councillor Clendon, do you want to just add in some comments now that you've been able to rejoin us?
Yeah, thank you. Just very briefly, my computer died at exactly the wrong minute. Yeah, just a general comment. I mean, I'm a person with a great regard for heritage, as many of us are who live in Northland. I'm also aware of the importance of property rights. And it does seem in a lot of situations, that's exactly the balance that we have to strike to protect the heritage, to give it the protection and the ongoing protection it needs and deserves, but also to respect people's rights to use and to do things on their own property as they see fit, and hopefully not to impose costs on them. So that's simply to give people a frame of reference that I'll be working from when we do get into the decision-making points at this. Yeah, beyond that, simply to thank people, to acknowledge this is far from an ideal means of communicating, because personally I've been on this wretched Zooms and other meetings this week for I think about 22 hours in total, but as soon as we can get back into face-to-face meetings, I assure you there's goodwill there to do that. I would much prefer to be in a room with people than doing this, but for the minute this is the best we can do. And so thank the members of the public and others, and also to the staff for putting this together, making it possible. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Councillor Clendon. I'm going to hand it over to Greg now too, just to respond to the question in the chat from Anne Palmer.
Thanks very much, Aisha. And yeah, Ian, you make a really good point there, and it's worth highlighting, reinforcing. Whilst we're working with this draft plan, which, you know, it's that space where we can be a bit more flexible and try and work out the balance. It is important to know that when we notify the proposed plan, some rules in the proposed plan have immediate legal effect, and that includes rules relating to historic heritage. So that means that when the proposed plan is notified, the rules will have effect with respect to potential resource consents, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that is where those rules will remain through the process and at the conclusion of the process. It's almost, again, like another starting point, and then through submissions, hearings, decisions, you'll get to an outcome that will represent a better balance. So it's almost like a bit of a hold. So thank you for raising that and allowing for me to make that available. When does it become notified? That's a really good question. We're aiming to get our content finalised this year. That doesn't mean that we're notifying this year. We were hoping to do that. I think we're finding that we have to definitely give respect to the processes that we're still discussing, and that's live on a few different topics, including this one. I think our aim is still to land our content this year. So that if that's any help or a guide, and we're working with our elected members on that process and what it looks like. Keep in mind that this is the last district plan that we'll be able to promote. There are changes at the end of next year, different legislation, and this is the last version of something that will allow for this level of community participation in our view at this stage. So there are some timeframes that are quite pointy next year, so we want to make sure that we're in a good space to give the right respect to that process and to our communities. Thanks, Aisha.
Thanks, Greg. I just wanted to take this opportunity to thank you all again for coming and participating with us today. We know that it has been a real challenge trying to fit you all into the restrictive timeframes that we thought would be plenty for this session. We do appreciate that some of you may need to depart, but we are happy to continue answering some questions. I'm going to start with Alec, who's had his hand up for quite some time. Alec, I'll give you the floor.
Well, that was unexpected. Yeah, no, I was just trying to get, I think one of the guests, Rohe, has confirmed my suspicion that it's probably Peter and Rowena Tana that I need to get in contact with, and possibly the Whareiti Lake trustees, George Packer and co. So I think I'm pretty right, thanks.
Cheryl, you've got your hand up. I'll take you next.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep, there you go.
Oh, cool. Well, for a start off, at least 4 communities have asked for public meetings. From now on, it sounds like there will be only opportunities for one-on-one. I believe that the difference between the SNAs, which might identify, specific areas on people's places, the heritage is affecting whole communities, of new houses to old houses to farms that have no heritage value. You're just putting a blanket heritage zone on them. So the community as a whole would need to know what's being talked about now, what's likely to be talked about on one-on-one sessions, and how will they get that information. I believe that a public meeting, as somebody said earlier, would serve the purpose better, because everybody in the community can hear what the issues are and what opportunities they can have to have some better input. Not everybody's computer savvy, so one-on-ones aren't going to work for everybody. We have to allow for that. The other thing is, more specifically in terms of the Arangitato Peninsula and the Arangitato Pa, that is going to be included in the heritage area. And as I've said in the chat and Ian said in the chat, it's covered under the Reserves Act. At the moment, the council has done nothing to maintain it over 52 years. It hasn't actually got the skills and ability to maintain it. And now the terraces, which were perfectly clearly seen at one stage, have been degraded by weed trees and weed vines and things. So if council's going to take that as part of a heritage thing, is it going to, act on its responsibilities?
Thanks, Cheryl. They are all very valid questions. I wanted to just flag back. We did put up a time frame and next steps slide. So we are committed to doing further engagement. As we've said quite a few times throughout the session, this is an initial feedback session. So where there is a demand, staff will endeavour to meet with communities. We know that COVID is a really unfortunate circumstance that has meant that where we had intended to hold public meetings, we haven't been able to. We're really up to the government's hands on what we can and cannot do. So hopefully we'll see some change in that space. I will flick it back now to the final slide, and again just reiterate that there is that email there, Let's Plan Together. If you've got any questions or you want to invite staff to a public meeting that's taking place or put through any questions, please do so through that email. Margaret, you've got your hand up. I'll invite you to unmute now. Margaret, I did say that you were unmuted for a little while, but you're muted again now. You're unmuted now. Can we hear you? We'll come back to you if you are able to rejoin, Margaret. Mike, you've got your hand raised. Okay, wait. Margaret's back. I can see you now too, Margaret.
Oh. Sorry, I've been lost my microphone.
Sorry, it sounds like you're in a room with someone else that's in the session too, so we're getting a bit of feedback.
Sorry, I lost my microphone. I got a message and I've been trying to dial back in, but I'm there. Okay, look, I am really, really concerned about the management of this process. I realise that you are dictated to by a certain extent by government, which in itself is a concern, but why can we not have public meetings? Are you there?
Greg, do you want to provide a response for that one?
Thanks, Margaret, and yeah, I appreciate the question. I should admit we were planning or scheduling and had booked public meetings prior to the second round of Delta lockdown. So I think this approach is kind of pragmatic. We're trying to find the best ways to allow for discussions in an uncertain environment. Having said that, we're open to methods that work best with communities, but making sure that we can we get the best value out of those forums as well. So if you continue to give us your feedback about what are the questions you want answered in terms of getting the right kind of progress on these issues, so that there is resources available on our website, and I've noted that there's a question about how do we get access to that. I'm going to suggest that everybody on this hui, we send an email to that has a little synopsis of all of the resources and easy links to those resources on Council's website. They're already there, but this email that we can share and you can push around to your networks and neighbours and friends that can take them directly to the resources in an efficient way. And you know, we're really keen to understand the types of questions that are burning, you know, the things that are the big picture things, that why are we doing this, and the types of methods that we can best employ. If you like, there's a menu that we could draw from to get the right types of heritage protection, understanding and awareness of these stories, and enduring outcomes for the resources and for communities. So I'd recommend or really welcome written feedback and suggestions about how we can best or better engage with you in uncertain times.
Thank you, Greg. In theory, that sounds very good. In practice, to email such a small number of us that are on this conference is not really very effective or efficient. How do we get this out to all the public? There are a number of people out there unaware of what's happening, who are unable to cope with computer Zooms. There are many elderly people around, and this is going to disenfranchise them. And I think that everybody should have a right to have a say to this, not just those who are computer literate. We need public meetings.
Thanks,
you,
Margaret.
And we're open to opportunities and tell us further suggestions. And even if there were public meetings, how do we best make the most of those opportunities? That's the kind of things we want to better understand.
Thanks, Greg. I think it's really important that staff in this session want to provide some reassurance that we are listening to you guys, most definitely. There's a lot, we are hearing that there are a lot of you that would like us to come out into the communities and facilitate or hold some public meetings so that we can engage in those considerations further to help you formulate your submissions, etc., and feel informed as communities to move forward in this process. All we can do at the moment is say that we are taking that into consideration, and we hope to let you all know how we go with those considerations. Mike, you've had your hand raised as well. I'll give you the floor.
Disconcerting.
Sorry, Mike, can we just make sure?
Yes, sorry.
The echo is.
Oh, that's just Mum's computer. Yeah, the fact that it just seems like, it just seems that council seems reluctant to hold public meetings. I think they're the only way to go, because then you've got all the public in one place. You're hearing each other's thoughts. It's a totally open, transparent forum. This just feels like we're being railroaded. I'm hearing all the right noises, but as per previous dealings with council, there's no guarantee, and nobody's actually saying that yes, you will do it. If we have to wait an extra week or two or month, even, to wait for us to get around the COVID restrictions and have public town meetings, I think that's what we've got to do. And there needs to be a public meeting for each individual area. This is just bonkers, and it just stinks of being railroaded. And if not, then that we do have an even bigger problem, because where has democracy gone? That's all I got to say.
I guess all I can reiterate is that we and this call as staff are listening to you. Amber, you've got your hand raised. Have you got any other comments or questions that you want to ask?
Yeah, I just wanted to weigh in on the fact that I'm here on behalf of quite a number of residents in our area who felt really uncomfortable as well with this online forum and taking part in this, and they feel like they've been excluded. I feel like I'm really concerned about the process and the way this process has been managed. The way that you've gone about it has created huge distrust in the council's efforts to genuinely look at this in conjunction with the community. And I don't think you've gone out with that intention. We hadn't been advised of this until 2 weeks ago when we received a letter, the property owners. In that letter, you tried to make it sound like we'd been made aware of it in March when we hadn't. And then you tried to make it sound like you were doing us a favour by giving us another opportunity to speak. You then said you wanted our feedback, but went on to say you were going to hold an online meeting and you hadn't come up with a date yet, which is another barrier which shows us that you don't really want to engage with us. You then set an unrealistic deadline of the 13th of October, which does not give people time to gather their thoughts, get information that they need and make submissions. Further to that, the information on the website consisted of some basic fluffy stuff, which is great to give an overview, really, really detailed reports, which are hard to digest, and really not much in the middle. I was looking for a question and answer section that might clearly explain what this actually means for me, what this means for my community. And there was just one paragraph in there that said I could expect more resource consents and the need to get specialised reports, and that I would be allowed to dig a garden. It is really not good enough. I don't believe you want to engage with us. I think you have set out to slide this through, and now you are backtracking and saying that this is an initial consultation because you realise you've done the wrong thing and you've been caught out. That's all I have to say just at the moment. The other members in our community have lots and lots of questions, and they really just want the opportunity to voice those and to better understand the whole situation.
Thanks, Amber, for sharing your comments. Ken from our communications team at the council has put a comment in the chat around our position on public meetings. Chester has his hand raised, and then if nobody else has any questions specific to the heritage areas, we'll do some closing comments. Thanks, Chester.
Yeah, thanks. Honestly, Amber said it all. So I just want to highlight one thing, and that is the October 13th date. That is the date that we need to hear over the next few days that has been extended or dealt with in one way or another. And the COVID rules are the restrictive factor in that. So we've got to get us down to a level where we can hold the meetings. So if that stalls the thing for a month or two while the country gets itself sorted, then so be it, guys. That's all I got to say. I need to know from you that 13th October date is gone. Thank you.
Thanks, Chester. Tammy's going to touch on that as part of her closing comments. I'll hand it over to you, Tammy.
First of all, I'd just like to say thank you, everyone, for taking time out of your day and participating in this process. I think one of the, well, there's been some frustration that it's an online gathering rather than a public meeting. One of the benefits that I can take away from today, it has enabled us to have a very lengthy discussion and a very robust discussion, and also it enabled us to bring John, our heritage expert, into the discussion as well. So while there might be some frustrations and concerns with the process, I think there has been some positive outcomes as well. So first of all, also thank you very much for sharing your views. All your questions have been very good, and it's opened up a very good dialogue and discussion, and I hope everyone has felt a little more informed now. we noticed that there has been some questions coming through the chat, which we haven't had an opportunity to respond to. So where questions have not been answered, we will respond to you via your email that you gave on the registration in the coming days. So once again, obviously there's been concern raised through this, through feedback, and also during this this online hui today about the 13th of October deadline for feedback. We are going to go away and look at different options and see what we should be doing moving forward. In terms of, it was highlighted by Margaret that there's some people that are uncomfortable or unable or in a position to use a computer or a desire to have a Zoom chat. So I just want to reconfirm that people have the opportunity to talk to us over the phone. Also, people can handwrite any feedback that they want to submit to us as well. So it does not have to be via email. It does not have to be via a Zoom chat. Those methods that have been around for a long time are still available, phone call, and also writing your feedback and handing it into one of the council officers. Now, also, as a result of this discussion, you might have some more questions. As per the information that we've put out to the public, people can contact us for a one-on-one discussion. That would be probably primarily with me. If it relates to some of those questions that are coming through in the tangata whenua space, then Teresa would be more than happy to talk to people as well. So if you would like to have an appointment or have a chat with one of us, please do contact us on that, those details that are given there on the Let's Plan Together at fndc.govt.nz, or as I said before, people can also contact council and ask to for one of us to give them a call as well. So once again, thank you very much for participating in the process. As has been advised, this is the start of the conversation, it's not the end point. But I will now ask Teresa to close the meeting for us. Thank you.
Ka pai, ngā mihi. Tēmi ngā mihi mahana ki a koutou katoa, ngā mihi mō o kōrero mō ngā pātai o tēnei kaupapa i tēnei ata. Kara ki a tātou. Kia tau, ki a tātou katoa, te ata whai o tō tātou ariki a ihu karaiti, me te aroha o te atua, me te whiwhinga tahitanga ki te wairua tapu, ake, amini. Kia ora.
Amene. Thank you, Teresa. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Hi, Dolly.
Hi, sorry, I was writing an email, leaving now.